And now for our last session of the Global Encounters Inaugural Conference. True pleasure and privilege to be introducing Himanshu Prabha, who is from the University of Oxford's Hindu Studies Centre, I believe, is the, but I think you're based in New Delhi at the moment, is that correct?
Yes.
That's right, thank you.
Yeah.
And I realised, Himanshu, that you have been in many of our sessions, and it must have been at a most unfriendly hour for you. So I do actually really appreciate that you must have made quite an effort to manage those time zones. So thank you very much. Himanshu is going to talk. I've lost my spot already. Oh dear, sorry. I did have it a microsecond ago. Sorry, I lost the title. Of Pearls and Chanks, Fishing and Sailing Communities in Eastern Indian Ocean. And I'll just say, if you haven't read Himanshu's book on Indian Ocean shrines, on shrines, is just wonderful, wonderful. So I highly recommend it. So
thank you.
I'm really looking forward to, very much looking forward to this. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm honored and delighted to have been invited to this. As you know, I work in the Indian Ocean and not in Australia. And so for me, this has been a learning experience. I have sat through the sessions, which I've thoroughly enjoyed and learned a great deal from. I'm also very pleased that two of the issues that I was going to raise in my presentation, World Heritage and the Indian Ocean, have already been raised earlier. World Heritage yesterday, when we discussed the spice route, which was promoted by Indonesia. And thanks to my previous two speakers for introducing the monsoons and the Indian Ocean. And let me now start by sharing screen and hope it works. Yes, and sorry, what am I supposed to do next? Okay. Yes, so I hope that's visible, right?
Yes, it's visible. Lynette? You just need to put it on slideshow.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, it's still. Now it's on slideshow. Okay.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to talk about is pearls, shanks, fishing and sailing communities. The reason why I chose this is I thought that since we had been discussing World Heritage, since we had been talking about the spice route, perhaps one could bring into focus India's own transnational maritime heritage route, which is perhaps not so well known. And this was the Mosam project. We've talked about the monsoons, which really come from Mosam or Mosam, which are Arabic words, and refer to maritime routes and cultural landscapes. Now, this was something that we had, that India had proposed in 2014. I'm not sure where it is right now because I no longer work with the government as of now. The emphasis in my understanding, and especially in my academic and research understanding, is that through these routes or through this transnational project, we would connect or we would bring our pre-colonial heritage into focus. That's a tall order, which I've understood and realized, and it's not that easy. So let me sort of suggest and present the challenges as well as what I look forward to as we move along. Sorry, I was trying to change my slide. So as a starting point to this route, or as a starting point for this presentation, for the World Heritage nomination, what we thought we could do is to plot out where the World Heritage sites are And it's quite extraordinary because these World Heritage Sites are proposed by nation states. They're not proposed by academics looking at maritime history, but really by nation states. And the yellow dots that you see across the coastline are the World Heritage Sites. What is striking and fascinating is that each of our countries across the Indian Ocean, from Africa to Australia, and I'm extremely sorry for putting Australia again in this corner, and apologies, Leonie, for not moving it more center stage, but we're based in India, looking at India and the Indian Ocean. But the point is that if one connects these dots, they speak across the ocean. But that's not what we have done. And that's not what World Heritage UNESCO sites have been about. They have been about really connecting and proposing national monuments and national heritage sites. So it's a sort of a startling thought that many of the countries, including Australia, which has 4 cultural World Heritage sites and 12 natural sites, have proposed these sites keeping in mind their own national histories rather than the ocean in mind. And I think that's something to think about as we move forward. So the question that I'm going to be discussing today and the issues that I'd like to raise is that how do we retrieve pre-colonial maritime connections, or how do we retrieve pre-colonial maritime heritage in this day and age when we've lived through major transformations both in maritime connectivity across the Bay of Bengal and across the Indian Ocean, largely through the nature of ships that came into being, steamship navigation, map making, and so on. But also the completely different focus on the development of new kinds of coastal architecture. So in Jackie's presentation, we had looked at Portuguese forts, and I'm going to talk about some of the new coastal architecture that came up in the 19th century, lighthouses, forts, cemeteries, and churches. And the basic point is that how this marginalized and continues to marginalize many of the communities who were actually traditionally involved in fishing and sailing. So my emphasis is on the Tamil coast. The Tamil coast is marked there with that red oblong circle. This is also a map of peninsular India, not so much of North India, and shows many of the European settlements which came into being from the 15th to the 18th century. It's very clear, and this is very clear from looking at this map, that most of these European settlements were coastal. So the first point is that the entire focus shifted towards the coast, because it's through the coast that Europeans came into the subcontinent. But having said that, it is also evident that much of the nature of these settlements, it changed the landscape of the coast quite dramatically. And let me give you one example. I can go on and talk about many others, but let me just talk about Tranquebar. Tranquebar is the early name, the colonial name that was given. It is today known as Tharangambadi, the Tamil name for this part of the coast, which is really a rich fishing coast in the state of Tamil Nadu. This is a Danish fort, which you see on your right. A Danish trading colony was set up in 1620, and then it was subsequently taken over by the British. But what is interesting about this part of the coast, and what is interesting about these slides, is that Tranquebar was not a new settlement. There were earlier settlements, and these were shrines. And on the left-hand side, you can see the 14th century shrine, which is a Shiva shrine, a Hindu temple. if you look at the two of them, it's very clear that what gets attention is the Danish fort as heritage, and not the Shiva shrine, which has been renovated over the years. But this is also a very rich fishing colony. It was battered badly during the tsunami of 2004. And there's a whole lot of literature on how post-tsunami settlement and post-tsunami aid that was given to the fishing village finally ended up in literally removing the fishing village from the coast, because it was argued that the fishing village was battered because it was so close to the coast, and that maybe it should move inland. But the point is, I mean, there's no point having a fishing village inland. The people need the coast or the beach to dry the fish and to work on. So it doesn't serve much useful purpose to have their houses kept very nice and clean, but their occupation then is completely lost. And the other point that I would also like to raise is that many of the churches, this was a Danish Protestant church that was built on this part of the coast in 1707. So, and this was again a new kind of architecture that was introduced on the Tamil coast. And something that came up yesterday, would people like to come and see the small Shiva temple or the fishing village that exists? Or would they be interested in seeing the fort? And the answer is very obvious. And much of the money, many of the tourists who come, the European tourists, they come to Tharangambadi not for the temple, but for the fort. And so really it's the fort which is the earner and which is the revenue earner and gets also much of the attention. Let me move on to another kind of architecture which comes up, and that is a lighthouse. You see the lighthouse on the right-hand side. These are 18th century structures that were built along the coast, all along the Indian coastline. And these were aids to navigation. They're no longer used today, but we still have about 185 lighthouses which survive all along the Indian coast. And the interesting point is that many of these lighthouses were built in proximity to earlier shrines or temples. On the right-hand side, where you see the lighthouse still standing, there's an arrow which marks the earlier temple. And this was an 8th century temple, which was visible from the sea. And it is interesting that the two should be built in such close proximity, and clearly shows that the temple was also a marker for vessels coming from the sea, and not merely as a place of worship. And that takes us into another area of how should we read temples and so on and so forth. But what I also find quite distressing, the arrow marks the shore temple, which is again a 9th, 10th century temple built right on the coast. This is a World Heritage Site, and it is one of the early sites which was nominated and inscribed by India. It was inscribed because it's a beautiful piece of architecture, and it's quite extraordinary that the nomination makes no mention of the fact that this is so right on the coast and that it faces the sea. And what was the shrine doing there? If all it had to do was to look very nice and aesthetically pleasing, if it was not relating itself to the community that traveled across the ocean. So I think there are issues not just within how we understand pre-colonial heritage, but also the way in which it continues to be promoted through a very different lens, which to my mind does not really meet the needs of the 21st century. Let me move on to, this is the Tamil coast, which is also a coast rich in fisheries. And the Portuguese, they were very interested in the pearl fisheries, but primarily not so much for trade as to spread Christianity. And it's in the 16th century that the Portuguese conquered the pearl fishery Tamil coast. from the local Muslim rulers. And one of the conditions for their support that they provided to the Paravas were the traditional fishing community. And this community finds mention much earlier in Tamil sources and dates back to a much earlier period, which I will not talk about here. But the main emphasis here of the Portuguese was the fact that this community should be converted to Christianity. And this was one of the conditions for their support that they provided to the Paravas. And there are accounts, and there's this detailed accounts of Francis Xavier, who spent at least several years, or 3-4 years, on the fishing coast, and he refers to about 20,000 Parava fishermen in 22 villages. And this is a very rich source because it provides a lot of interesting information and data on the local fishing communities and the villages and their interaction with the Portuguese. But also, as with other places, which I have mentioned very clearly earlier on, churches were built. And another interesting aspect of of the Portuguese settlement on the Tamil coast was the fact that the Portuguese in the 16th century, they discovered the bones of St. Thomas. Now, there is the apocryphal Acts of Thomas, which talk about the fact that St. Thomas was one of the missionaries who came to India as early as the 1st century CE. So we are talking about many hundred years long before the Portuguese came. And it's a fascinating account, but it's an account which can be read in, it's a multi-layered account, can be read in various ways. And I don't want to go into that discussion right now. But the fact is that in the 16th century, when the Portuguese came, they knew about this account, or they were told about this account, because there was a community of Thomas Christians in the region. And so by the 16th century, they had discovered the bones of the apostle, which were then interred in this cathedral in the 19th century. Sorry, in the 16th century, and the cathedral was expanded. And on the left-hand side, you see the expanded church as it exists today in Mylapore, which is Madras or Chennai on the east coast, southeast coast of India. This is an old 20th century photograph of pearl and shank fishing in the Gulf of Mannar off the Tamil coast. And as you will notice, the equipment is not very extensive, or it's very simple. And this is a tradition that continues to the present, but there have been many changes. And also, I would argue there have been many changes from the earlier mentions of pearl fishers in the Tamil texts that we have. And these are some of the map shows you the pearl fisheries area and some of the villages that are known for the pearl fisheries. Archaeologically, we do know that pearl fishing dates back to at least the 1st century CE from the Periplus Maris Erythrea, which is a Greek text which refers to much diving for pearls and oysters, both at the mouth of the Persian Gulf and also the Tamil coast, and argues that the Indian pearls were better than the Arabian pearls. But never mind, that's not the issue here. The issue is that these pearls were used not only for trading. The Periplus refers to them as trade items, but it's very clear when you look at the coastal shrines that the pearls were not merely objects of trade. They were enshrined in relic caskets. They were also donated to temples, and so were major ritual objects which were involved in worship, in enshrinement in Buddhist stupas. And they were also traded. I mean, there's no doubt that these were traded, and there is mention of Tamil merchant trading guilds who traded the pearls across to Southeast Asia and all the way to China. So certainly between the 10th and the 13th century, there are these merchant guilds who traded across. Now, if you look at the centers of pearl fisheries in the Indian Ocean, I know that there is in the Sulu archipelago in the Philippines, there's also pearls. But if one is looking at the Indian Ocean, there are three main centers. I was quite surprised. I have not read enough about the Kimberley coast, and I don't know enough about the pearl fisheries there and the status. What I have read and what is available in secondary literature is a discussion of how colonial intervention changed labor policies or changed engagement of labor in the pearl fisheries. But I am not sure if more work has been done on the pearl fisheries in an earlier period, in the period that I'm talking about. But the Persian Gulf fisheries, which you see on the top corner of the map here, these are really interesting, primarily because Bahrain has been able to promote this pearl fisheries narrative to the World Heritage stage, and they have inscribed pearl fisheries as World Heritage sites. Not just showing interest in the fishing grounds or in the structure in the houses, but they have also been able to include the songs of the pearl fishers. They have also talked about trade. And so the point really is that if one creatively looks at the research that's available, or creatively does research which connects, connections can be made in a variety of ways and not necessarily by drawing lines on the map. And I certainly think pearl fisheries is a good example of ways in which small objects or commodities can connect over long distances without really tracing routes on the map. And what fascinates me is the fact that archaeologically, and again, I stand corrected if I've got this wrong, in 2011, pearls were recovered from a rock shelter 70 meters inland from the current shoreline on the Kimberley coast. And these, the layers were radiocarbon dated to around the beginning of the Common Era. And again, the emphasis in the report was much more pearls as items of trade. And I'm just thinking to myself, to me, it does seem that trade is only one aspect of it, and we need to think beyond that and to look at the importance to local communities in terms of ritual objects, objects of donation, gift items, and there's many other ways in which pearls interacted with the community. And to my surprise, it's not just the Kimberley coast or India or Persian Gulf which has provided evidence for pearls. Pearls also survive in shipwrecks. And the Cirebon shipwreck is a 10th century shipwreck of the Java Sea. It was found in 2003 in Indonesian waters. And while there's a lot of emphasis when one deals with shipwrecks on ceramics, and particularly Chinese 10th century Chinese ceramics, Chinese coins, there's much less emphasis on carved gastropod shells, which were presumably ritual objects, on jewelry, and on pearls. And it is quite extraordinary that there were nearly 12,000 pearls that were found in this shipwreck, and most of them were very small. And this is just 14 of the pearl samples that were recovered from the shipwreck. It's a 10th century shipwreck. So clearly pearls moved around. Who took them along, what they were for, these are all themes which we need to research much more deeply and research more extensively. But it is very obvious that marine resources were not limited to any part of the coast or any part of the Indian Ocean, but moved around quite extensively across the ocean. The other objects which fascinate me are these conches, the conch shells, which these come from, these were carved. You can see the carving. So they are not just sort of marine shells recovered from the sea, but they're also carved, and they were sort of worked for perhaps other purposes. And these were again found in the Cirebon shipwreck in the 10th century. And these Turbinella pyrum has a long history in the Indian subcontinent, but also in the Indian Ocean. And goes back at least to the 3rd, 2nd millennium, the Bronze Age, the 3rd, 2nd millennium BCE Harappan sites, the prehistoric period. And these have been found both in the pearl fisheries coast that I showed earlier in South India and Sri Lanka, but also in Gujarat, in what is today Pakistan, the mouth of the Indus. And again, there is evidence for the use of these, not just for subsistence strategies, which archaeologists and prehistorians often talk about, of these coastal communities, but also the fact that they were worked on and traded and worked by craftspeople at inland centers. We know of shell bangles, beads for inlay and so on. But more importantly, the last point, which I have been talking about earlier as well, libation vessels. These are examples from Bronze Age sites in Northwest India, not so much in the Tamil coast, Northwest India, but certainly these are examples of the Tamil coast being, the resources there being used extensively over long distances, and worked also as ritual libation vessels. But it's also argued that these were also used for administering either sacred water or medicine in later times. But my favorite, and an example which I really feel brings together all that I've been talking about so far, is this specimen, which was found in archaeological excavations at a site on the east coast. The site is of Nagarjun Konda. The site is dated to the early centuries of the Common Era, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries onwards. It has a variety of religious groups living there, but this shell was found in a Hindu temple, and it's inscribed. You can see the arrow marks out the inscription. The inscription just talks about 8-armed Vishnu, or the deity Vishnu. But there is other carving on this, which clearly connects it to ritual, but also the fact that, and this is still done today, these conch shells are also blown to make sacred sound, but in earlier societies or in the prehistoric period would also have been used as signaling devices. So clearly the resources of the sea not just travel, but are also used in a variety of ways and connect to many aspects of society. Let me move on now to the fishing and sailing communities. These go back to the 5th millennium BCE, and I'm talking about the Indian Ocean region, Southeast Asia, South Asia. Again, we have fish remains, but are used both as a food resource. But it's also interesting, many of these are marine fish. They have been identified that some of the dangerous varieties of fish were used for bead making. And more interestingly, there is fish depictions and fish symbolism on seals. These come from the site of Harappa, which is marked on the map. And as you can see, this is part of the Gulf and the Arabian Sea. And here again, at the bottom of the slide, one sees a potsherd with fish or painting of fish. But more importantly, fish plays an important part in Hindu cosmology, one would say. The first avatar or incarnation of Vishnu was a fish. And this, I think, is a stupendous sculpture, 8th, 9th, 10th century, which is in the British Museum. It depicts the huge fish that's shown in the center, shows the first incarnation of Vishnu, and he carries a shrine on it carries a shrine on its back, and it really denotes the fish as savior from the waters to humanity. So I finally moved to my case study, which is the district of Nagapattinam. The district is marked on the map of India on the southeast coast. This again is a very rich fishing area, and again was quite badly hit in the tsunami. And its history and archaeology dates back a long time. Goes back to the prehistoric period. Iron Age megalithic burials have been found around in the district. But what I am interested in and what I will talk about is the 8th, 9th century brick-built Buddhist temple, which survived well into the 19th century. And this temple was used as a landmark by sailors going down the east coast of India, because this district is also very close to Madras, which was an early center. And remember the first map I showed you, there were several settlements, European settlements on this part of the coast. And there are European accounts of sailing down the eastern coast and using this, what was called the Chinese pagoda, which is actually a Buddhist temple, as a landmark. This is a watercolor, 18th century, 1784 watercolor. The Nagapattinam brick temple is indicated by the arrow. And like I said, it was in early European accounts, it's referred to as the Chinese pagoda because it seems to look like a pagoda, but subsequently I've looked at many more sites all across the Indian Ocean, all the way to China. These kind of these brick temples, which were built at several centers along the coast and were certainly used as markers for landing. This does not exist anymore, the brick temple. It was demolished in the 19th century by the French Jesuits to build a college. And the building that you see on the right-hand side is presumably, there's no firm evidence, but presumably was built in the same spot. It's no longer a college because the college was shifted. The Jesuit college has now shifted to another site inland. But what it is today is a district court. So now the monument doesn't survive. The monument is gone. What we have in the town is colonial architecture. But what I would like to highlight and what I would like to stress is that the space continues to be associated with the fishing community. And I started by saying that Nagapattinam is one of the the district itself is one of the rich fishing district, rich in fish resources in India, and continues to be so. But the way in which the fishing communities continue to be associated with the space, the sacred space, even though the Chinese pagoda no longer exists, is very evident from this temple, the Kaya Rohanaswamy temple. As you see it today, it's a renovated temple, 11th, 12th century, but there are sculptures, and again, there are early sculptures which are plastered into the walls, which are 6th, 7th century sculptures. We also know of Tamil poets who sing about the fishing villages and the fishing community of this area. And these golden fish, there's this fabulous stories associated with how this, excuse me, how this golden fish came to be associated with this temple. And the story says that one of the fishermen, he got this golden fish in his net, and now the point was, should he throw it back into the water or should he keep it? And because keeping it would really earn him a lot of money, but he decided to throw it back into the water. This golden fish was really an incarnation of the god, and the god rewarded him. And as a result of this, this act of generosity, the fishing community continues to come to this temple. They donate these golden fish. This is not gold. I mean, today it's I think it's made of some much more fragile material. But this temple continues to be associated with many of their life cycle rituals and so on. But again, another surprising aspect of Nagapattinam, in addition to all these fishing villages that I've talked about, are these lifestyle stone Buddha images that you find. This is under a tree. So these are not under, not in sort of spaces in temples or otherwise. Many of them are out in the open under a tree. And this seated Buddha image, and I can talk more about it, but this is also an indicator of the links that Nagapattinam had in the past with not just being an important center on the Tamil coast, but with Java and Sumatra, and as well as China. And in just a moment, I will show you further examples of where this has been found. But I did mention earlier that we have references, inscriptional references to these Tamil merchant guilds who were trading all the way to China. And the granite Buddha image that you see on your screen was found from Sumatra, Kotachina, which is marked in the Straits of Malacca, marked on the map. This, I think, is today in a Chinese temple, if I'm not mistaken, but the head has gone. And there is a Tamil inscription from the other side of on the other side of the Sumatran coast, which refers to Tamil merchants coming to Baros, and also refers to activities of the Tamil merchant guilds. So then, what do we know about Nagapattinam? We no longer have it. The brick temple has been lost to posterity. It no longer survives. But what I've tried to show is that it interacted with within several spheres and not just one sphere. There were the local fishing communities and merchant groups who donated to Nagapattinam, and I sort of talked about these. The trade networks extended all the way up to Sumatra and China. It was also an important landmark, not just for the local travel down the East Coast, but well into the 19th century. And the European sailors do refer to it and describe it in their writings. So finally, then, where I started from, maritime heritage. So we draw on the past to create a maritime heritage of relevance to the present. But how should we do it? What is the way forward? Yes, understanding pre-colonial cultural context would be ideal, would really be wonderful if one could do that. But there are all kinds of challenges and all kinds of issues involved with that. The other would be to include local fishing and other communities in this reconstruction, or in this definition of the maritime heritage. And as a historian, I've often thought deeply about this because we do have a lot of ethnographic data. There are very detailed accounts of fisheries officials, of British officials, who recorded in great detail the kind of information that they got along the coast of fishing and sailing communities, of their customs and so on. And I often wonder about the continuity. Can we use this ethnographic data? Can we use information which really dates to a much later period for understanding contacts of an earlier period? And that's, as a historian, That's my dilemma. And I am aware that this comes from a disciplinary training that I have gone through. Now, clearly, there has to be a shift from monumental architecture. I have just shown you that otherwise we are back in the track of admiring huge structures, beautifully built, so on and so forth. Can we shift to routes? Can we shift to heritage routes? Not just trading routes, but routes which involved objects, pearls, for example, shank, for example, also different ways of looking at fish itself. And perhaps for me, the most important is that one needs to look beyond national boundaries, but that is always, that's always a challenge, and that's always difficult when one is looking at World Heritage sites. So thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening to me. And I'm sort of sorry that, you know, the southern part of the Indian Ocean has not come in too much, but I have learned a lot, and I hope my presentation has been of some interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It most certainly was of more than just some interest. It was of tremendous interest. Thank you very, very much. I'll ask if anybody has any questions. I've got a couple of comments to make, and I see Adrian Vickers is here, and I was just about to do another shameless plug. Adrian and Julia Martinez has put together a book called The Pearl Frontier, which is looking at Indonesian labour and Indigenous people in the northern trading networks in Australia. I'm just going to pop it in the chat, so to recommend that. I did have a question, and that was you showed Helparapa. I think that's how you say it, Helparapa. There was, and you showed that there were some symbols associated with that, and one of them was a symbol of a fish, which looked very much like the symbol that we think of as Christ, the fish. Is there a connection?
That's 3000 BCE, so that's a long way off.
Okay,
3,000 years.
That's fascinating then.
Oh, I never thought of that.
I think it's really interesting. Yes, yeah. Good. Look, Ian McNiven's just put a note here, and I should just preface this with Ian put a lot of work into the Budj Bim World Heritage Plan. So he's just said a good example of intangible heritage, seascapes, spiritscapes, and world heritage is, and now it's got a word here that I cannot possibly even try to say, Marine National Monument in Hawaii that covers 1.5 million square kilometres and is put on the World Heritage List in 2010 as an ancestral environment whose preservation both illuminates and embodies the Hawaiian concept of literal and spiritual kinship of all things in the natural world, including man or humans, I guess, and represents the site where life originates and the place to where spirits return after death. So that might be, that's in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, sure.
We will be saving the chats on all of these as well. So if anybody wants to double back and look at things.
Does anyone can I answer? Yeah, sorry. Can I answer that question?
Oh yes, please.
Yes, I have looked at this has been I've looked at cultural landscapes, and cultural landscapes is a category of World Heritage nomination, and India, of course, has a recent one on cultural landscapes. But if you look at the way in which UNESCO defines cultural landscapes and the way in which archaeologists define cultural landscapes, I think it's two different things. I mean, this is not the place for me to launch into these differences. But yes, clearly, how does one put it? I'm not in agreement in the way in which UNESCO defines it, but yes, certainly it's a way forward. So thank you.
Excellent. Does anybody want to ask a question or perhaps put their hand up and make a comment? I love the sweeping scope. I have, yes, I just love the way you tied it all together. It's really fascinating, completely fascinating. and that I was interested to see Papua highlighted in your description of the Buddhist sculptures as well. And I wasn't quite sure there's no connection there that I'm aware of.
Sorry, I couldn't get that.
In your map, you had a map that had
Sure, yeah.
the various bits were shaded in green and had a couple of, and I was just wondering, it had Papua was also shaded in green, and it was in relation to the Buddhist, the statues of Buddha.
Yes, I think it was just the map of Southeast Asia, shaded in green, and not necessarily showing all the areas which had Buddhist connections. So the Buddhist connections that I was trying to show was, with Sumatra, with Indonesia, and with China, rather than with the entire Southeast Asian and the Pacific area.
Thank you. Shan.
Hi, thank you for that really wonderful talk that both kind of went across and beneath the sea. I wanted to know a little bit more about that. Well, I guess two things. The relationship between a landmark and a lighthouse is kind of the relationship between kind of night and a night landmark and a day landmark. Was there any kind of lightedness used, or was sailing at night avoided to, I mean, I think it's fascinating that the lighthouses are on the same sites, and I think you're absolutely right that there's definitely a connection there. But I'm just thinking about later colonial associations with lighthouses, that they, Stevenson was the son of a lighthouse engineer in Scotland, and was very much perceived by Scots people on the coast as a colonial intrusion, which was preventing them from, gaining wreckage benefits, so that they would go, and wreckers would go along the coast. But so I would just be interested to see this kind of prehistory of lighthouses as a different. Anyway, you can just speak more about it. And then the other one was that first map that you had, the UNESCO Indian Ocean, with just the coastline highlighted. Is that a proposed heritage area, or is it currently in force? I noticed Cape Town and Durban, places I'm familiar with, are on that map. So I just, but not, they weren't listed in sites, but the kind of region was highlighted. Sure. If you could say a little bit more about that map as well.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the two questions. And the first one, it's usually agreed and accepted that sailing was much more during the day. Not all of it is acceptable, because there was a lot of use of the stars. And I think yesterday we talked about Horst Liebner's presentation at some point, and how he uses the stars, and he says, the stars show up differently in different parts of the Indian Ocean world, or the different hemispheres. So sailing was certainly by night as well. Having said that, what were these lighthouses, or the temples, not so much the lighthouses, but what were the temples doing when they couldn't be seen at night? And it is said that there was some kind of a light, some kind of a fire, should one say, not so much light, which was lit on top of these to guide vessels. A lot of this is coastal. And also when, say, for Walter Elliot, for example, when he sails down, because Madras also had a railway, network, or the end of the railway, which led inland into the interior. So, this Nagapattinam was also used as a marker to indicate, because the Indian coast is very flat. It's very difficult to, if you're coming in from the sea, it's very difficult to sort of really locate it. So you do need some kind of markers. The temples were one. There are other markers, hills, trees. There's a whole lot of other markers that there are references to. But because the coast is so flat, you need something to identify where you have reached along that coast. Your second question about what that map that I showed about the World Heritage Sites. This was an exercise that, okay, let me put it differently, that, you know, the MOSM project, as it was, as I suggested, is very ambitious, I would think, and no national government would ever be interested in funding research for a project which doesn't promote national interests. So maybe there are, but sorry. So what, as a starting point, we thought, you know, if we go from the known to the unknown. So if we go by saying, okay, so there are all these World Heritage Sites, you know, all the East African coast, Kilwa, all of these sites, Madagascar, Mauritius, for example, has a place, you know, landing place for slaves, which were coming from India. So you have all these sites, for heaven's sake, why can't they talk across to sites, you know, across the ocean? Why must they only talk to people inside and, you know, for national interest? So that was an exercise which we were trying to do, which was also brought to the attention of UNESCO. UNESCO's argument was, you know, the point is, if India, for example, has, I think it's 37 World Heritage Sites, and now you suddenly come up and say this Mahabalipuram can be made, you know, sort of connect to maritime heritage, connect to Borobudur, for example, what does India get? You don't get any more sites. You know, what is the advantage? You see my point? So it went nowhere. But as an academic exercise, you know, it's really interesting that as an academic interest exercise, all the centers which are of interest are coastal and need to be connected across the ocean.
If it's published anywhere, I would love to be able to cite it.
I think I can send you references. I think you're on the list, and yeah, I'll make a note, and I'll certainly send you references, because that was something that, you know, I was really looking. That was the easiest thing to do, you know, rather than to start with this ambitious project of heritage routes.
There's a couple of comments, and I am aware of the time, but I think it's a couple of them are very useful, and I might just go to Matthew's talking about asking about whether or not you were aware that in the 1920s he thinks, and it's around the time of the sort of heliocentric and out of Egypt kind of almost sort of obsession of people like Grafton Elliott Smith, he argued for pearls being the reason for the extension of the world system as far as New Guinea. So pearls were seen as a driving force in that. And Adrian has just mentioned also, of course, Papua New Guinea and birds of paradise as a trade item, sea plumes and paradise. Yep. Matthew's also noted that lighthouses around the UK coast and often the UK coast church towers were the original landmarks. Yeah. They were the original lighthouse, as it were. And he remembers one in 19th century adjacent at Reculver in Kent that was demolished. Temples in India, churches in the UK, maybe they were illuminated. And I was wondering the same. And finally, they're jumping in quick and fast. Adrian just mentioned also that Robert Louis Stevenson's father, in fact, built a lighthouse in Port Venus in Tahiti. And Ian McNiven's noted that in the South Pacific, the London Missionary Society turned building churches on top of Indigenous ritual sites into an art form. So that's I think there's such a lot there, so much to go through. Lily's asking whether or not there's any thoughts about Indonesia's efforts to register the spice route for UNESCO heritage. I think that was an incredibly exciting possibility that we discussed yesterday. So that's our group of questions.
About the thanks. That's interesting about the churches. I haven't thought about the churches, but if you look at the mosques, that come up across the Indian Ocean littoral, And they have those similar towers. And again, if one sees paintings, early colonial period paintings, you see these towers emerging quite prominently from the coast. So yes, and which takes me back. Then obviously one has to see closer connections with religion, with religious architecture. If churches, mosques, temples are doing this to attract people coming across the seas, then we need to think differently of the way in which we have looked at religious shrines and religious sites. But thanks for the references, to the churches.
Thank you.
And to the fact that, for instance, somebody's mentioned about Norway. Close proximity to the holy places. Yeah.
As I said, we will be saving all of these
okay, thanks.
Chats, and everyone can have access to them. If you want access, just let me know, and we will make sure that's possible. But I think that I probably should at that point say thank you so very, very much. Greatly appreciated that talk. It was fantastic. Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that really does draw our inaugural Global Encounters Symposium to a close, but I need to say a few words, a few thanks. Obviously, the first people I want to thank are our speakers, because without them, we wouldn't have a symposium at all. So Keith Camacho, Kyle Mays, Silawahi, Billy Van Utrecht, Matthew Spriggs, our own Global Encounters team, Leonie, Lee, Lily, and myself, Hilma Farid, Ian McNiven, Shona Coyne and Tiffany Shalom, Shan Lavery and Jackie Koske, Himanshu Prabha Ray, and Karaili Suter for taking us on that terrific exhibition and tour through the Shipwrecks Gallery. Thank you everyone who's contributed, all the speakers. Perhaps the person that we must thank the most is David Howarth, who has been the backbone of this conference. This symposium. He's been, there's a little something arriving for you tomorrow, David, to enjoy. So I hope you enjoy that. But
yeah, that's lovely.
It's been fantastic. I've learned so much. I hope we can think about pulling some of the speakers together as part of one of our collected volumes, because we have a new monograph series through Palgrave Macmillan, which is called Histories of Global Encounters and First Nations Peoples. And it would be fantastic if we got some of the contributors here to do that. Global Encounters started right in the middle of a pandemic, right at the start of a pandemic. So we sort of paralleled it. We've really wanted to do this symposium. We were desperate to do it in person, which is why we held it off from last year. Next year, our plan is to hold the symposium in Jakarta at the Monash University Jakarta campus. We hope that everybody will be there. Our plans are the following year that it will be potentially in Southern Africa. So we're really keen, yes. So we're very keen. It's been absolutely incredible. I really appreciate everyone's hard work. And I hope normally at the end of a conference or a symposium, you'd all get around to have a glass of wine and congratulate each other and you've achieved this terrific thing. Sadly, that's not happened today. Well, you can all go and have a glass of wine, that's fine. But unfortunately, thank you, Matthew. Toast. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. I got a great deal out of it. Found it utterly stimulating, and I sincerely appreciate everybody's help. So thank you, everyone.
Before we go, Lynette, we also need to thank you for guiding us through it and hosting the whole thing, because your job doing that has been fantastic as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll say farewell, and I look forward to catching up with you all in 2022. Bye.